Good morning, and welcome to the Pennsylvania Military Finance Alliance's Making Sense of Finance webinar series. This is the second to the last session, and we hope that you've enjoyed yourself so far. And we look forward to having you tonight as we wrap up with a fun game of consumer fraud bingo. If you're a member of the Armed Forces, family member, or veteran, we want to thank you for your service and your dedication to our great country. Today, I'll be talking with you about the steps we need to take if you become a victim of a fraud or a theft, because I truly believe that it's not a matter of if, it's when each of us becomes a victim of some form of fraud or scam or identity theft. So knowing what to do becomes very critical. I am recording this session, so I'll ask that you put your questions in the chat box and I'll answer them at the end once we've stopped the recording. On behalf of the Pennsylvania Military Finance Alliance and the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities, we welcome you to this session. Finally, I will be sending out a PDF of today's PowerPoint presentation later today. Once you've received it, if you have any other questions, you're welcome to contact me by responding to email or giving me a call. So let's get started. My name is Katrina Boyer. I'm the Investor Education Coordinator at the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities, and I'm thrilled today to be talking with you about the 5 steps we need to take if we become a victim. So if you've ever had your identity stolen, given money to someone who took advantage of you and didn't do what they were supposed to do in exchange for your money, maybe you've had unauthorized transactions from your bank account or your credit card, or maybe even had new accounts opened in your name without your permission. If any of those things have ever happened to you, you may have been a victim of a scam or identity theft or fraud. But what's really important for us to all to understand is that when this happens, we're not alone. We don't have to get through this by ourselves, and there are resources that are available that can help us get through the process. Studies show that victims of a fraud or scam feel just as victimized as someone who is a victim of a violent crime. So it's really important that we know where to go to get help, and that, again, that we understand that we're not alone in this process. But before we get into the steps we need to take, I just want to show this image of this is from the Federal Trade Commission's website, the Consumer Sentinel Network. And this is data for Pennsylvania alone from January through December of last year. There were a total of 10,257 individuals who reported fraud, identity theft, or some other type of crime, financial crime. Now, the national average for loss is $324 during that time. Pennsylvanians lost an average of $482. So it's $160 more than the national average. And the total fraud loss was $14.66 million. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that could have gone towards helping our families to continue to make ends meet while we were going through the pandemic. When I think about the fact that this is simply for January 1st through December 2nd of 2020, it makes me realize just how much this impacted our state. And the reality is that, over $14.5 million could have gone a long way to help families to make ends meet. So I just think it's important to understand the depth of the problem so that we are prepared and we know that we're not alone if we become victims. So today we're going to talk about the 5 steps that we need to take when we become a victim in order to recover completely in a way that is nice and smooth and we don't end up missing anything. So the steps we'll talk about are stopping the loss, reporting it, verifying our credit. We'll talk about the importance of keeping a notebook, and we'll wrap it up with information on why we shouldn't be embarrassed. But let's talk about step number one. Maybe you discover an unauthorized transaction in your credit card statement, or maybe even your bank statement. The first thing that you have to do is you have to notify the company that's involved. If it's your credit card, your credit union, your financial institution, your bank, your savings and loan, maybe you suddenly start getting a bill from a cell phone provider that you don't recognize. The first thing we have to do is we have to notify those companies that there is a problem. When you notify your financial institution or your credit card company, they're going to want details, but you have to stop the loss. So that means that you need to notify the institution or the company that you have these unauthorized transactions and you want the cards canceled. In the case of a cell phone company, you need to tell them that you want the account closed because it's not yours. When you call them, you need to be prepared to give them all the information that they need. You need to tell them from your perspective what happened. So you're telling them this is an unauthorized transaction, this is not my account, whatever that situation is. And then you need to tell them how you realize that. Maybe you saw the unauthorized transaction on your financial institution's the application on your phone, or maybe you saw it when you looked at your statement. Sometimes we don't find out about these things until debt collections start to call. Whatever your situation, you need to be able to give them the information about how you discovered it. You have to also give them your accurate contact information, because sometimes criminals will submit an address change on your behalf so that they can stop you from getting information about your statements or stop you from realizing that they have taken advantage of you. So make sure that you give them the correct contact information for you, including telephone number, whatever other telephone, your cell phone, your home number, maybe an office number. And then you need to be prepared to provide them with documentation that would be proof that what you're telling them is true. Oftentimes, financial institutions, if it's one unauthorized transaction, they may not require that you submit a police report. But if you're claiming that the entire account is fraudulent, or a certain amount, a threshold, if it goes over, a few dollars, they may require a police report. So that kind of brings us to step number two. We have to report this crime, and it's important that we report it 3 different times. That seems like overkill, but we need to report it to our local police, whether that's the state police or your local precinct, because they know what's happening right in your community. And they can sort of see that picture at that much closer level. So if they know of a couple different people who are having a similar issue, they can sort of put those pieces together. Also, they're going to provide you with that police report that you have to provide to the company that had the unauthorized transaction from you. But you also have to report it to the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. Or if you don't live in Pennsylvania, I know that we have a few people who are on from other states. If you don't live in Pennsylvania, you need to report it to your state's Attorney General's office. And the reason for that is, I said that our local police have jurisdiction over our area. Pennsylvania Attorney General, or your state's Attorney General, is typically the top that law enforcement organization for that state. So they have jurisdiction over everything in Pennsylvania, from Pittsburgh to Scranton, from Erie to Philadelphia, and every place in between. They see what's happening across the state, and they have jurisdiction over that. But they don't have jurisdiction over what happens in Ohio or California, Jersey, Delaware, whatever. They don't have jurisdiction over the other states. So your Federal Trade Commission at the federal level has jurisdiction over the whole United States, and they take that much bigger picture and are able to track trends. And what's cool about the Federal Trade Commission is, remember when I showed you that that map, or that graphic earlier that showed just how many Pennsylvanians had been victimized? The Federal Trade Commission is who published that uh, that that graphic. So they are able to pull information in a much better way than other organizations. So not only that, but the Federal Trade Commission shares information with other state with other states and other federal agencies. So the Federal Trade Commission shares information with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. And I'm going to continue this story throughout today, but I can tell you that I spoke with an investigator from the Postal Inspection Service, and they were telling me about some cases, or a case that they were investigating that had happened 5 years before. And they had finally seen this trend, and were starting to work on that investigation. So that's why it's so important that we report to all three levels of law enforcement. I know it seems like a hassle, but it is very important that we do that. So the third step that we need to take is we need to check our credit report, because sometimes we not only see a problem with one account, there could be problems with multiple accounts. So you can go to annualcreditreport.com. Under federal law, you are entitled to a free copy of your credit report once a year under normal circumstances. But let's face it, the reality is we're not in normal circumstances, are we? We're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we certainly are not at the end yet with COVID and the pandemic. So the three credit reporting bureaus, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, have made it so that we can check our credit reports online every single week. Now, the slide that you're looking at here shows that it's through April of 2021, but in March or April of this year, they actually extended that so that you can pull that weekly report once a week until 2022. So that's a really fantastic way for us to be able to pull that information so we're able to track and make sure that everything is accurate. But a lot of people ask me, Katrina, what am I looking for? So you go online to annualcreditreport.com, and you put in your personal information, and remember that you want to check to make sure that the site is HTTPS and you're at annualcreditreport.com. There are some other websites that will tout that you can get your free credit report from them, but the only one that's mandated by federal law is annualcreditreport.com. So when you get there and you put in your personal information, your name, social security number, address, some of that information, you're going to get a big, long report. Depending on whether or not you've ever changed your name, it will have every combination of name you've ever used. So if you've been married more than once, or maybe sometimes you apply for credit under a maiden name, or you use a middle initial, each combination that you apply for credit is going to show up on your credit report. So don't be startled when your credit report is 20 something pages long, because it's not uncommon for that to happen. So when you're looking at it, don't be overwhelmed. You're going to be going through each page individually. The first thing you want to do is check the personal information and make sure it's all accurate. The last time I pulled my credit, I actually found 2 different addresses that weren't mine on my report. I also found a cell phone number that didn't belong to me. Now, it's easy to fix that. If you're checking frequently, it's easy to just go online and make the corrections. And then within about 2 weeks, you'll receive notification that the inconsistencies have been corrected. But you're also needing to check your existing credit. So if you've got a mortgage, a car loan, maybe a personal loan, any credit cards or revolving lines of credit that you may have, you need to check the limits and balances for all of those accounts. And the reason I say you need to check the limits is because when a criminal wants to call and say, "This is Katrina Boyer, and I would like an increase on my limit for this card," if that criminal can provide enough information about me, it would be easy for them to increase a limit and then submit an address change on my behalf so that I no longer get my credit card statements. And then that frees them up to be able to use my card as much as they want, as quickly as they can. So when you're looking at your credit report, it's critical that you look at existing limits and balances. So if I have a card, so for instance, I actually keep a card on my person when I'm traveling in case I hit an emergency. Well, I don't carry a balance on that. So when I look at my credit report, if I see a balance on a card that isn't supposed to have a balance, that's a problem, right? So that's why we have to look at limits and balances. And then you also have to look for accounts that aren't yours. Believe it or not, criminals don't hesitate to open new credit in your name. I actually met a woman who said, "Katrina, my sister stole my identity." And this was a few years ago. I met her at um, a senior expo I was doing. And she says, "My sister stole my identity." And I kind of looked at her and she said, "And she bought a house." And then I really looked at her, and the reality is, um, she didn't realize that her sister had stolen her identity until her sister lost her job. And once her sister lost her job and couldn't make the mortgage payments anymore, guess who the mortgage company started to call? They started calling this woman that I met at this expo, and she said that she couldn't believe that her sister had done that. And the reality is that it's not uncommon for family members to steal identities. I've never heard of anyone who stole an identity and bought a house, though. So that kind of was, the icing on the cake there. But, if she had pulled her credit report, she would have seen a mortgage on a property that she didn't own. And she could have rectified the problem much, much sooner. So this is why it's so critical that we check our credit reports as often as we can. So under normal circumstances, you can do that once a year. But if I pull Experian today under normal circumstances, and then in 3 or 4 months, maybe I pull TransUnion, and 3 or 4 months after that, I pull Equifax, I can basically check my report under normal circumstances 3 times a year. And it's pretty typical for each of those reporting bureaus to have very similar information. So make sure that you keep that in mind as you start to move forward with pulling your credit report. All right. So if you see something that's not right, you want to make sure that you report it to the 3 credit reporting bureaus. When you report it to one, if you call them, they're going to tell you that they will share the information with the other 2. But the reality is that computers don't always do what they're supposed to do. So it's in your best interest to report it to all three bureaus. Now, I mentioned the inconsistency I had on one of my credit reports. I believe that was a data entry mistake, and I don't believe that anyone was trying to steal my identity. But data entry mistakes happen. So I reported it to the one and they fixed it. And the next time I pulled my report from one of the other bureaus, that information was never on my report. So I'm convinced that it was, again, that data entry mistake. But we need to remember that if it's an actual identity theft, we've got to report it to all three. And when you discover an account that maybe isn't yours, like the cell phone service that we talked about early on, if you find something like that, it's critical that you check your credit report, because you don't know what else that person may or may not have been able to do with your information. So make sure that you do that. And then step number 4 is we need to keep a notebook. And, it's step number 4, but the reality is we need to start that notebook as soon as we discover something's not right. So get a notebook, a binder, a folder, something, and keep notes. Write down the date and time of everything that you do. So if I discovered yesterday on May 25th that I was a victim of identity theft, that's going to be my first entry. I'm going to date it 5/25 with the time that I discovered it, and this is what I found. Maybe I found unauthorized transactions. Maybe I discovered that someone had opened a cell phone account in my name. Whatever it is, I need to describe it. And then each person that I talk to, I need to record the date and time. And I talk to, X person at ABC Cellular, and this is what we talked about, and here's the file number that they gave me. And if they don't give you a file number, ask them about it. It could be an incident number, a report number, whatever it is. You want to make sure that you have it so that you can keep everything together in one place. And then once you are done with that, you have to file the police report. Well, make sure that you write down who you talked to, whether you did it online. Make sure that you're reporting all of that information. And then you'll start to get stuff in the mail. Make sure that you keep all correspondence together. And you want to hold on to that indefinitely, or at least until you know that the information is all cleared up. But that takes years. Remember, I mentioned the Postal Inspection Service and sharing information. And I talked about the Postal Inspection Service that was actually investigating a crime, a string of identity theft that had taken place 5 years before. If someone comes to me and says, "Hey, Katrina, you reported this thing that happened back in 2015, I'm going to be really confused. I'll remember the fact that it happened, but I'm not going to remember those intricate details. And that's where having that notebook comes into play. If someone comes to you and says, we're investigating this and we need to have information from you so that we can further our investigation, if you have a detailed notebook, you're going to be that investigator's very best friend, because you're going to be able to look at it. It's going to trigger your memory, and it's going to help them with that investigation. And then, in addition to that, it gives them all the data that they need in order to pursue that investigation. And hopefully, eventually, they will be able to stop the bad guys. That's what we ultimately want. And the reality is, we're all watching crime TV or special victims unit, or whatever show, whatever police show we watch. The in one episode, over the course of an hour, the crime happens, the police get involved, they investigate it, they find the bad guy, they take him to court, and they find him guilty in a matter of an hour. But the reality is these things take years for investigators to investigate before they can find the criminals, if they ever do. So that's why keeping that notebook becomes really important. And I've had consumers who have reached out to me and told me, Katrina, I filed the report I tried to file with the Federal Trade Commission, and the Federal Trade Commission said that they would take the report, but there was nothing that they could do. And I think the reality is that often we get told that simply so that we don't expect that whole, you know, catching the bad guy in a very short period of time, because that's not reality. The reality is that it takes a really long time to get them. So make sure that you keep that notebook and keep it for a long period of time. I actually had, so before I started doing outreach, I took consumer complaints at the Department of Banking and Securities. And I actually had a couple that came to me during that time and had been victims of identity theft. And I advised them to keep a notebook, just like I'm doing now. And they came back to me over a year later and wanted me to know that they had kept the notebook, and they had actually at that point just recently gone and applied for a new car loan. And when they went to apply for the car loan, there was stuff still showing up on their credit report, and the car dealerships denied their loan until this couple provided the notebook, and the car dealership could see that they were in fact victims of identity theft, and they were able to approve the loan at a nice rate. So having that notebook is great to be able to provide it to investigators, but it's also great to be able for you to support what you're telling a potential lender or a potential employer, because the reality is that our credit reports are used for things like approving us for credit. They also are used sometimes for job applications. If an employer is considering hiring, it's not uncommon for them to pull credit reports. Maybe you're shopping for car insurance or homeowners insurance. Your credit report is accessed, and the companies will use your credit report to determine whether or not they're going to insure you. And if they are going to insure you, what's the rate you're going to get? So that notebook, again, goes a really long way in protecting you for the longer term future. All right, so let's move on. One thing that I need to emphasize as so important is do not be embarrassed. I've worked for the department for 16 years now. I did consumer um, I did consumer services for 6 years, and I've done outreach now for 10. Let me tell you, I have met all kinds of people who have been victims of frauds and scams. And I have to stress not to be embarrassed. It's so important. I've talked to law enforcement, attorneys, doctors, mid-level management people, and everyone in between, and people who didn't have money to lose to begin with. The reality is criminals target us all. So don't be embarrassed, and make sure that you talk to someone that you trust. And if they're not sure what you should do, then call the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities, or call the Federal Trade Commission. I'm going to provide you with lots of other resources for places that you can go to make sure that you're doing what you need to do in order to recover from the scam or identity theft. All right, so let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. So the Federal Trade Commission has a really cool website. It has a publication that you can download and print. It's called Identity Theft, a Recovery Plan. So this publication that you can download is basically a workbook for victims of identity theft or scams. And it basically walks you through step by step all the different things that you need to do. And you can find it at identitytheft.gov. If you would like copies of that, you can, so depending on your need, you can have the Federal Trade Commission, they'll mail you in boxes of 25 or 50, I think. I keep them at my office. So if you would like a copy of this workbook, later on today, send me an email once you have my email address, because it'll be provided. Make sure you send me an email, and the next time I go into the office, I'm happy to send out those publications to you. So make sure that you get that information, and we'll get it to you. Someone asked if we're going to be able to send this through PDF. Absolutely. I will be sending the slide deck by PDF, but I will also include a link so that you can download the book yourself. Thank you for that question. All right, so let's talk about resources, because I suggested that if you become a victim, you need to contact all these people, but I didn't provide you with how to do that. So if you're not sure what your local police department, how to contact them, you can go to policelocator.com/PA, and you can type in your zip code, and it will give you the contact information for your local law enforcement. If you're like me and you live in a town that does not have a local police department, you can contact the Pennsylvania State Police. And if you're not sure what barracks to contact, you can go to psp.pa.gov, and you can type in, again, the city, your zip code, and they will tell you which police barracks is yours. So for instance, I live in Perry County. My precinct is in Newport. Now, I also said you needed to contact the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office and the Federal Trade Commission. So the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office can be found at www.attorneygeneral.gov if you're in Pennsylvania. If you're not in Pennsylvania, just type in the name of your state and Attorney General, and you'll be able to find them pretty easily. And then the Federal Trade Commission's website is consumer.ftc.gov. Those are all really great resources that you need to report that you've been a victim. These are the organizations that you need to report that to. The Federal Trade Commission and the Attorney General also have great resources on scams and identity theft. Speaking of scams and identity theft, did you know that you could freeze your credit report? It used to be that victims of identity theft could freeze their credit at no cost. But if you wanted to just freeze your credit because you wanted to, it cost somewhere between $5 and $50 per reporting bureau. After the Equifax breach from a couple of years ago, the federal government decided that consumers should be able to freeze their credit once a year, or they should be able to freeze their credit at no cost anytime. So that's fantastic, because freezing your credit stops new credit from being opened in your name, period. It also will stop pre-approved credit card offers from coming in the mail, because the companies can't see your credit rating or your credit history to pre-approve you. However, it's important that you understand, when you have a credit freeze, you won't be able to apply for new credit. If you're shopping for insurance or a home, or you're moving into a rental property, you're going to have to lift that freeze, but it's not hard. That's the great thing about the credit freezes. So the federal government says, once you register or call and set up a PIN number, when you place that freeze, it has to be done within 24 hours. When you want to lift a freeze, maybe you are moving, maybe you're shopping for insurance or applying for a job, or you're actually applying for credit. You can go online or make that call, and they have to have that lifted within an hour. So it's 60 minutes to lift the freeze and 24 hours to place the freeze. Again, this is a great way to avoid having new credit opened in your name. So I encourage you, when we're done here, to freeze your credit report. For those of you who are enlisted and maybe, you're getting ready to deploy, freezing your credit is a great way to give yourself that sense of security that you don't have to worry about what's happening with your credit while you're deployed. So consider that before the next time you are out for an extended period of time. Freezing your credit is a great way to be able to protect yourself from having new credit. And when I first started doing outreach, new credit in consumers' name was the least of our worries. We were more concerned about having our cards compromised and having unauthorized transactions. But the reality is that new credit is the number 2 form of identity theft now. That's crazy, if you ask me. It has become such a prolific problem that we have to be very concerned about it. So again, freezing your credit is going to stop that new credit from being opened in your name. So that's really, really important. Now, I mentioned earlier, don't be embarrassed and talk to someone that you trust. The Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities has a consumer services office that are available during regular business hours for Pennsylvanians to call and ask questions. If you think you may have been a victim, or maybe you got something in the mail that you think might be a scam, call the office and talk to someone who has that knowledge and is able to help you understand what's happening. So when you call 800 PA Banks, a real life person answers the phone, and all the services that we offer are free. Whether it is an identity theft question, it's a scam question, maybe you are facing foreclosure, or maybe you are being charged fees that you don't understand by a lender. Our Office of Consumer Services are specially trained to answer a whole range of questions. And if it involves a licensee or someone who's registered with us, an investment professional, or even a financial institution, we can actually provide services to help you resolve those issues. So our consumer services staff are a great resource for consumers to get the help that they need. And again, those services are free. When you send in a written complaint, we forward that to the company and we ask the company to respond. We give them 30 days to respond, but the reality is that our turnaround time for responses is about a week to 10 days. So because we contact a specific person at the company, we're not contacting that 800 number where you have to sit on hold forever. We reach out to our contact who answers us relatively quickly because we are the state regulator. So keep that in mind if you have questions or concerns about identity theft, scams, or a financial transaction that you're not sure about. If we're not the right agency, we will provide you with the resource that you need to contact the right agency. I know when I worked in this office, we had a lot of people who would call about things that we didn't have jurisdiction over, and we had a directory that we were able to provide those resources. So don't hesitate to reach out to our consumer services office. So we are getting ready to wrap up. I want to tell you that we have one more military Making Sense of Finance event. It's tonight. Don't miss Consumer Fraud Bingo. If you haven't already registered, you can go to our Eventbrite page at padobs.eventbrite.com. You can email me and I can send you the link to register through WebEx. But make sure that you do it soon because I will be sending out by email bingo cards. so that you're ready to play tonight at 6 o'clock. I'll tell you a little secret. We have prizes that we're going to be mailing out. So you don't want to miss Consumer Fraud Bingo. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great way for us to end our Making Sense of Finance series of events. But I want to tell you that the Department of Banking and Securities is going to continue to offer free webinars. We have had Midweek Money Matters happening. We've been hosting them since November. And we cover topics ranging from ABCs of, who your investment professional is. We talk about different types of investment accounts, different types of retirement accounts. In June, we're going to focus on elder abuse and exploitation. We're going to talk about how we can help our loved ones avoid it. We're going to talk about the top 3 scams that older adults are facing. We're going to talk about the red flags and what can we do as we start to approach becoming older adults. What can we do to protect ourselves from becoming victims in the future? So you can go to padobs.eventbrite.com and register for those events. I do only have the next 2 events on our Eventbrite page. I am going to be updating with June's sessions the end of this week, early next week, so you'll be able to register for those upcoming events. But watch we have a Facebook page, PA Banking and Securities, and again, the padobs.eventbrite.com has a lot of those events. Also on our website, dobs.pa.gov, we have a calendar where you can see more than just the Midweek Money Matters. You can see all of the sessions that we offer. Everything that we do is free because we're a state agency. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording.